Good afternoon and welcome to today's Safety Conference webinar presentation. Thank you for attending. My name is Kate Parrish, Editorial Director of ANSI and your host for today's conference. If you have follow-up questions, comments, ideas, or suggestions after today's event, please feel free to contact me at the phone number or email address on the screen. MCM Group would like to extend a special thank you to the sponsor for today's presentation, the International Powered Access Federation. IPAF promotes the safe and effective use of powered access worldwide. Established in 1983, IPAF is a not-for-profit members organization that represents the interests of manufacturers, distributors, users, rental and training companies. It serves as a forum for all active in the world of powered access. IPAF has played a role in promoting many of the design, safety, and testing procedures that are now established in the powered access industry. Learn more about IPAF and its training programs at www.ipaf.org. When safety was first introduced in 2007, our mission was to bring lifting equipment users and operators presentations and information to raise safety awareness, introduce best practices, and bring compliance awareness to the construction, rental, and industrial markets. Topics are selected to help provide clarification, unify industry efforts, and help save the lives of equipment operators and workers on the ground. Today's presenter is Tony Groat, who is the IPAF North American Manager and AWPT Executive Vice President. He'll be discussing the proposed updates to the ANSI and CSA aerial work platform standards. If you have questions for Tony during the presentation, please type them into the question box on your screen. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and can be accessed this week on safetyconference.com and the NCM Group YouTube channel. Addresses for both will be shown at the end of this presentation as well. I'm going to pass the controls over to Tony Groat. Tony, whenever you're ready, let's get started.
Thank you, Katie. Hopefully we have our technology in place and you can now see the presentation screen. So on behalf of Maximum Capacity Media and the International Powered Access Federation, I wish to welcome everyone joining today's webinar. Focus today will be on the development of the U.S. and Canadian standards covering aerial work platforms, mast climbers, and transport platforms. I'll provide you with an overview of why and how standards are developed, updated, by who, some specific changes being worked on by the ANSI A92 standards for aerials, CSA B354 standards covering both aerial work platforms, mast climbers, and to be introduced transport platforms. I'm going to be more specific on the B354 Canadian standards as they have been released for public comment. Add that these are similar to issues being addressed by the ANSI A92 committee being drafted at this time. I'll be speaking to you for about the next 30 minutes, so I suggest that, as Katie suggested, that you write down questions and submit those during the process of submission of each one of the slides as we go through the presentation, and all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. So to provide you, kind of a brief overview, my name is Tony Groat. I work with the International Powered Access Federation, also known as IPAF. As Katie mentioned, a nonprofit member-owned association. Mission is to promote the safe and effective use of powered access equipment, specifically aerial work platforms and mast climbers. Hopefully many of you on the webinar are members, and if not, you should be, and we can correct that at a later time. Part of my role with IPAF affords me the opportunity to sit on various standard development, fulfill our mission, and the voice of our members. I sit on the main voting committee for the ANSI A92 CSA B54 standards, and I'm also a member of individual standard drafting committees for both groups. Additionally, I'm a member of the ISO TC214, which is the U.S. Technical Advisory Committee, or TAG, for the U.S. aerial standards. Today, the A92 and CSA B354 standards are written by product, and each is separately developed, not necessarily by the same people, to address the design, safe use, and training requirements for each product. As we move forward in the effort to harmonize language between these standards, we can see that there is more language that's the same or should be the same. So with that focus on standardization, both ANSI A92 and B354 main committees have agreed to move forward to a single set of design, safe use, and training standards to cover all aerial work platforms. The ISO standards written with that structure were agreed to be used as the foundation for these new standards. Language from existing standards will obviously be considered in the review. It was decided at the time that vehicle-mounted standards in both the U.S. and Canada will remain for Standardization, or ISO, is an independent, non-governmental membership organization and the world's largest developer of voluntary international standards. Members of the national standard bodies, such as ANSI and CSA, are part of 163 member countries around the world who participate in the development of the standards. International standards make things work. They give world-class specifications for products, services, systems, and ensure that the quality and safety and efficiency of those products are in place. They're instrumental in facilitating quality. For businesses, they're strategic tools that reduce the cost of minimizing waste and errors and increase productivity. They help companies to access new markets, level the playing field for developing countries, and facilitate free and fair global trade. It's important to know that both ANSI and CSA are part of the development of ISO standards and are the voting member for their countries. Each country gets one vote. So while ANSI and CSA are part of the ISO standard development, there are different needs or focuses in different countries and the potential difference of opinions on what is finally approved. So as a result, the full adoption of the ISO standards is not common, as there's a need to modify or change the standards to meet the individual country requirements. An example is that ISO standards do not assign responsibilities for tasks, whereas the ANSI A92 standards are structured specifically to assign responsibilities and it is the desired result to offer standards that should be considered by all countries to promote harmonization of language and processes in country standards worldwide. The ANSI standards are developed for the U.S. market and CSA standards for the Canadian market. The process to create these voluntary standards is guided by the cardinal principle of the diverse range of stakeholders. The proposed standards being developed will follow the ISO structure with design, safe use, and training, and will cover all types of aerial work platforms. The same standard structure will be used by CSA in the development of new mass climbing work platform standards and the development of new proposed standards for transport platforms. So in CSA in Canada, you'll have a design, safe use, and training standard for now aerials, mass climbers, and transport platforms. So why change now? You know, why do we have to change the standards Why, don't we just leave things the way they are today? Well, this slide offers sample pictures that demonstrate the continued change in the equipment, technology, and obviously the corresponding safe use, maintenance, and training that will be required for this equipment. The market's demand for smaller units to access into more and more areas, taller units to reach higher tasks, larger units to provide greater working areas with greater capacity, the ability to reach below ground level, and all various equipments available in today's marketplace today and tomorrow require our industry to promote the means to do this consistently, effectively, safely, and competitively. Do today's standards address the design needs for mini scissors or mega booms now in the market? Do the new products require additional safe use consideration and corresponding training? Is there a need for different operator training for the more complex lifts available today? Well, our industry standards need to address these changing needs for our market. When new products are developed, the industry is capable of developing standards long before regulatory bodies such as OSHA can address industry needs. So while regulations like OSHA are law, they do not change timely or keep pace with industry change. Mast climbers have been in the U.S. market since the mid-1980s, but they are still not addressed either in the U.S. or in Canadian regulations. The new transport platforms are the same way, and trying to apply current regulations is truly not effective. Industry standards lead the way, and standards are the tool to assist all industry stakeholders in meeting their responsibilities and ensuring safe and effective use. So again, why are we doing this change? Well, change is constant, so there's a natural need to review and update our standards. Specifically with ANSI, they have defined very specific guidelines on how often approved standards must be maintained. Recently, some A92 standards were reaffirmed after 5 years from the initial publication, A92.3, .5, and .6, meaning they're reissued without any change. So when you're looking at the standards, there's a requirement that they must be reviewed every 5 years and not extend beyond 10 years before any changes are made. So it's a mandate in development of standards and maintenance. So today we're talking about what's going on, what changes are being made. So under development today, this is a list of the A92 and CSA B354 standards under development. And today I'm going to focus primarily on the AWP standards and proposed language already released by the CSA B354 standards that were released for public comment. I need to restate that even the CSA standards being discussed today are not final. They are still out there with public comments that need to have final review by the main committee before they're ready for any level of final approval. Starting with the design standard, B354 standards. Both ANSI A92 and B354 main committees have agreed to use the ISO standards as the basis for these new standards. For all aerial work platforms, so there's consistency on how we manufacture them, how we train on them, and how we use them safely. There are 3 standards that will address it: design, safe use, and training for all aerial work platforms. And while it is the intent of ISO standards, both the U.S. and Canada will still have separate standards covering vehicle mounted. This may change in the future, but this product class will not be included in the new standards. The design standard actually leads the way for all of our standards, with both safe use and training addressing the needs defined by the standards. So you design the product, and then you define how you safely use them, and then how you train on how to use them safely. So the design standard is really the foundation. The new design standards will provide more detailed requirements. There will be many more calculations required by the standard than before. As most manufacturers produce products for many countries, the adoption of the language in the ISO standards will not be new. They'll likely be producing equipment that follows most of the things that are being proposed in some part of the world. But there are some changes that they will have to make, some changes that may provide more flexibility in design for new products and, in the end, impact users. So the question that I'm sure all of you want to hear about today is, what are those changes and how are they going to affect me? So again, looking at this slide, you can see that we're going from 7 pages, 10 pages, up to 58 pages plus annexes. So you know that there is more language that's in there. How is it going to impact me? Well, the first subtle change, and maybe insignificant to most, the standards will introduce by their title and referenced throughout the standard by the internationally termed Mobile Elevated Work Platform with the acronym MEWP, which is, everyone pronounces it MEWP. Having standardized terminology is important in documentation and communication. Begin to look for this in incoming communications. Mobile Elevated Work Platforms and the term MEWP. Beyond that, a more significant change is the definition of the different types or groups of MEWPs. Again, get used to that term, Mobile Elevated Work Platforms, what you normally call AWPs today. Today's standards do not use the term scissor lift, as these pictures will hopefully explain why not. All are covered by today's self-propelled elevating work platform standard, either A92.6 or CSA B354.2. Many people may want to use the term scissor lift, but it's never used in any of our current standards. So as we move away from product-specific standards, such as A92.6 or CSA B354.2, how are we going to classify the different types of MEWPs? There's that term again. How are we going to differentiate these different types of classifications as we move forward? And it was agreed by both ANSI and CSA to adopt the international definitions of MEWPs, groups A and B, types 1, 2, and 3. Well, groups A and B, and again, these are definitions. Group A is any aerial work platform where the platform does not extend beyond the center of the work platform area and is always inside the tipping lines. And Group B, simply put, is any MEWP that's not in Group A. As you get used to these, you'll end up looking at these and saying, Group B are boom-type lifts, and Group B is anything that's not a boom. So that's where the platform will extend beyond the center of the platform area or outside the tipping zone of the chassis. So more specifically looking at these, Type 1 machines is generally require outriggers and to be in place prior to elevation. They're not drivable, or at least not drivable when the platform is going to be elevated. So Group A, again, is platforms do not extend beyond the center point of the area and always inside the tipping lines. Group B, MEWPs, not in Group A. So here you're looking at it, we have Type 1, which is in Group A, and Type 1, which is in Group B. So you can see the Group B are boom-type lifts, Group A are vertical-type lifts, and A and the Type 1 are machines that are not going to be drivable when the platform goes in the air. Type 3 are MUPs for which traveling with the work platform in the elevated position is controlled from the point of work platform relating to traveling. So here, when you're looking at the self-propelled machines, are really what's going to be a type 3. And again, when you're looking at group A, vertical lifts, group B, boom type lifts. So these new nomenclature or definitions that we'll be using are things that you're going to have to become accustomed to, because we're not calling them by standards boom lifts, scissor lifts, and we haven't done that in the past. So now we're coming up with, again, standardized terminology and definitions to be used in all countries. Not to confuse the subject of the new definitions, but look at this slide that's currently available in the market today. Is it self-propelled? Can it be driven when it's not in the stowed position? Does the platform extend beyond the center point of the platform area and always inside the tipping lines? What are the design, safe use, training requirements for this machine? The standards provide the answer. So in this particular machine, while many people will look at that and at some level it looks like a scissor lift, it's actually a self-propelled boom, or in this particular case, by our new standards, a 3B. Further changes within the design standard is a shift to more calculations. Let me start with the fact that I'm not a manufacturer or design engineer, but I am a sitting member on the design standard committee, and I understand this change to be significant enough to discuss. You can clearly see through all the additional pages that are going to be issued in the new design standard that there are changes. And it really comes to be predominantly that there are much more detailed calculations to account for most of the additional requirements. This change in design based on testing with safety factors, such as the rated load plus 1.333, versus design based on more calculations, removes that safety factor and replaces it with calculations for all the variables. And they're compounded. So now there's a specific calculation for wind load, for stability, and all of these have very detailed calculations. When you're looking at one example, the impact of wind, the new standards will take the forces assumed to act horizontally at the center of the surface and address all the parts of the MUP, persons on the MUP, and the equipment on the MUP. So the new standards will bring about calculations that talk about the shape factors applied on the surface exposed by the wind of all the machines. So is it a circular member? Is it a square member? Is it a rectangular member? And there are factors for all those. And all of those added calculations make it very specific for that machine. As a result, the design standards will be more specific to the actual design that each machine manufactured. The adoption of standardized design calculations used by other countries can provide several benefits. A manufacturer can lower the cost by designing and manufacture, stocking the same parts for one machine for all countries versus different machines and different parts for every country they're manufacturing in. The option to design to lower calculation minimums allows the opportunity for new products to gain access to heights and sizes not possible today. So the other bullet that I have on there is change to lower minimums. Today, the minimum platform capacity calculation is based on 1,340 newtons or 300 pounds minimum. And now it goes to how many people on the machine and what is the capacity, so it can go to 264.5 pounds. So while you may look at that saying, well, now they're going to cheapen up the machines and make the capacity less. It's really not the change of existing designs. It's saying now they have the ability to design a platform that maybe a 300-pound capacity platform will not allow them to design a machine that can fit through a small opening in a sailing panel, whereas going to the 264.5-pound may allow that new design to come forth and give us new products. Again, the same thing with the manual force, going from 150-pound minimum requirement to as low as 50 pounds. So again, These will allow more flexibility with the design of products in the marketplace. Another change that's out there, it may be, terminology differences, but it really is based on our standards. If today a user was asked, what is the rated slope on the lift that I'm using, most likely they'll answer incorrectly. It actually is 0, is the rated slope on most aerials out in the marketplace today. And it's driven, and when you look at the decal plate on most aerial work platforms, you look at the rated slope, it'll say that it's 0. And most people think that it's greater than that. And that's because the design standards today require that the slope warning device is activated at 5 degrees over the rated slope. So think about it in those terms, that if we ended up having a rated slope of 5 degrees and then the warning sign went off after that, you end up having a stability issue. So based on what the standards currently require, we end up having a rated slope being 0. And most people who are using this, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So really we're making a change to chassis inclination, which is actually even more accurate, because chassis inclination takes into effect the rated slope of the ground that you can ride on, plus the deflection of the machine. So if you take a boom type lift specifically and rotate it off to the side, just the tires and movement that you have on there will impact it. So most likely you're going to find out that we're going to go from 5 degrees to 4.5 degrees. Further on in the standards, and this really goes across all 3 of the new standards, users must ensure that the MUP has an annual inspection prior to use. Now, how do they know it if they don't own the machine and haven't performed the inspection themselves? Like an inspection decal on every motor vehicle, an annual inspection decal can provide the assurance that a qualified person performed the task. So while today some rental companies may be doing this, not all do, and not all owned machines are marked. This new language defines a standard for the decal design with what's required information on it, the size of it, the general location that it will be placed in. So the design standard will create a decal, a sample decal that's to be used. The safe use standard will define the requirement to perform the inspections and place the decal on the MUP. And the training standard will define the responsibility of users and operators to verify that the MUP's annual inspection is up to date by verifying the decal. So we now have a very systemic approach to how that's done. Probably one of the more drastic changes that most people will perceive in the new design standard changes is the implementation of load sensing that will be introduced on all MUPs. Again, mobile elevated work platforms, not AWPs, MUPs. It is a safety device that is currently on MUPs in other countries. It provides operational control until an overload condition is corrected. So it's really not new to the industry. It's really been available for many, many years in the marketplace. It's been on most aerials in Europe for several years, and it's really an added safety feature on the machines. It requires additional training and maintenance, and all of those parts need to be implemented throughout the design, safe use, and training standard. So a little bit more on load sensing as a value proposition. Well, what is it? The fundamental reason for this is a safety device to prevent overloading. And the initial complaint will be heard by those who overload the platform. So if we look at some historical information and feedback on the implementation of load sensing, you're going to look at the first one. Load sensing restricts or limits the use of the machine. So, especially booms or smaller capacity platforms, and this will result in dissatisfied users. Oh, I did this before, and now I can't do it anymore. Well, that means that you were overloading the platform before and you want to continue doing it, because that's the only thing load sensing is doing, is saying, here's the rated capacity and you can't exceed this. Users request older machines without load sensing, so they can continue to do what they've done before, overloading the machine, exceed the load capacity. So again, historically, you're looking at, this is some of the feedback that, that we've gotten historically. Customers can do or adjust or tamper with the less sophisticated load sensing devices. Well, obviously, this is misuse. No safety device should ever be touched. It will increase the risk of injury. And typically, this is something that you can see steel erectors or people who are putting heavier loads on the machine will have a tendency to do. Again, not anything you should adjust on any machine at any time. Incorrect securing during transport. Tying down the basket of a boom can really impact that you can end up having this load be imposed on this machine during transport. And if it's set off, then you can't move the machine when it's out there. Again, the loads need to be secured properly. The manufacturer will tell you how to secure the aerial work platforms during transport. So all these things are going to be implementation items that you need to be aware of. But again, the fundamental process of looking at this is load sensing is a safety device, and really it's there to protect the users of the equipment, the machine itself. So that will be one of the changes that you'll see, and again, it's language that's proposed in both A92 and B354. In the safe use standards, we have some changes that are coming about. The most current language only allows variation in use with the prior written permission of manufacturers. That's generally terminology that goes in most places throughout the standard. And users have complained that they have performed some tests safely and may be even more safer than other available options, but they can't get manufacturers approved in the timeline that they need. Additionally, some manufacturers are no longer in business. So while the intent is continued to rely upon manufacturers as the primary authority, the standards have provided an alternative option to the use of professional engineers as qualified persons for approved option uses on MUPs. So again, this is kind of a change in what the standards have defined and provide more flexibility in the field. Another change, and again, this is based on the CSA language being, issued and compared to both CSA and ANSI. The pre-delivery was not specifically stated as a requirement in prior CSA standards. Further, note that the CSA standards are also including added responsibilities under pre-delivery inspections for owner and dealers, under daily pre-start inspection, the user. Owners, dealers were not specifically named in the prior standards, and in order to be very specific in safe use, these are the people who have to do these tests, and really they're specifically spelled out now in the standards, bringing about, again, that harmonized language throughout all of the country standards. Another item that's in place that will be introduced in the safe use standards, while not actually new in Canada or some other countries, but in the U.S. under the A92 standards, will be introducing the requirement for structural inspections 10 years after the date of manufacture and every 5 years thereafter to verify the structural integrity of critical components of the aerial work platform and its stability as originally manufactured in accordance with standards that were in effect at the time the machine was manufactured. So this is a new requirement that's out there. Machines have a certain duration or life that's in place, and it really has been defined by the manufacturers that at a 10-year point, this structural testing should be in place, and this will be introduced through both CSA which is, as I said, for the most part already in place and being proposed as new language for the ANSI standards. Additionally, it's worth mentioning that under the implementation of the structural testing, the structural inspections shall be carried out under the direction of a professional engineer. So it's not something that the rental yard or a contractor owner is just going to go out there and have one of their people do. Additional language is the implementation of the requirement for qualified persons to perform tasks. Is not new in both regulations and standard, but the specific language for training is general with no specifics. So while we have this language in here that maintenance personnel training is going to be required, really we have not introduced a training standard for that, but it really does go beyond just saying you need to be a qualified person. So while it may have been assumed in the past that they needed to be trained, this new language specifically in CSA is language that needs to be paid attention to. Additionally, in the safe use standard is language relating to safety bulletins. So this is new CSA language addressing safety bulletins as a topic and is generally covered by the current ANSI standards. But the assigning of specific responsibilities to MUP owners to register with the manufacturer is new language, and it reaches all owners, those who purchase used equipment from any source, to ensure that they are known owners and receive necessary communications from the manufacturer. We can't say go do the safety bulletins and the manufacturers not know who the owners are to get those bulletins to them. Another broad introduction is the involvement or development of risk assessments. So safe use of a MUP is required, and again I'm using the term MUP again, which is an aerial work platform, mobile elevated work platform. Safe use of a MUP requires a hazard assessment of the task to be performed and the site conditions where it's to be used. So while the design standards, you go over there and make a perfectly sound piece of equipment for its intended use, you need to use it appropriately in the right environment for safety to be in place. So specifically, we're looking at providing multiple steps of developing risk assessments. So there'll be a section on identifying the task to be undertaken, selection of the appropriate aerial work platform for its use, a MUP, assessment of the risk associated with the task, identifying control measures for those associated risks, identifying safe work procedures, and lastly, a rescue from height plan, because if someone needs to be rescued, having a plan for that is something that needs to be done before the incident occurs. So risk assessments in safe use have now a very defined place and have been well documented in the new standards. Record retention. CSA standards require that records be kept permanently, and today ANSI has 4 years, and this list provides a very specific detail of what are the required items for record retention that will be standardized from country to country. So it provides that information and, again, retained for a minimum of 10 years after the sale of the aerial work platform or MUP, or until it is permanently removed from service by the owner. So record retention in the U.S. going from 4 years to 10 years after the sale, and permanently was with CSA, and now it's, again, 10 years after the sale or until it's permanently removed from service. Safe use and the associated training for operators must address known hazards. and this new language will raise the depth and understanding of wind and weather. Currently, it has been addressed only in the workplace inspection, and it says, look for wind and weather. So providing a broader level of understanding of what those risks and hazards are, new language has been introduced, as you can see, wind and storm considerations, effective wind forces on the MUP, effective wind on equipment in the work platform. So if you have a plate of glass, local wind effects in use with thunderstorms. So the safe use standard is providing more guidance and more detail for safe use. In that regard, traveling, meaning driving a mobile elevated work platform, has more information as well. MUP traveling, fall protection requirements, tasks to be done before moving, when moving, traveling to or from or within the work area, while working at height, and issues like distraction. All of these will be, again, providing more guidance so that when if we're going to use these things safely, these items all need to be addressed. Working in the area where electrical hazards exist in the work area has raised in the recognition of issues that need to have increased attention. The minimum approach distance chart that you see here is being reintroduced. This was in the standards in the past, it's now being reintroduced. And really, the fact that we know through our gathering of information that in the North American market, electrocutions has been one of the leading causes of fatalities. So we need to address this in safe use, and we're paying more attention to and giving more detail to this. Even in the regards of this particular line item, the details in the standard really clearly state that even knowing what the voltages are here has to be done by a qualified person. So we're trying to make sure that people are aware of the hazard in the work environment and make sure that they do appropriate actions to keep away from the potential hazard. Another, I'm going to say, new entry into the safe use is on the topic of vacating or entering a MUP at height. So aerial work platforms are not specifically designed to transfer personnel from one level to another or for leaving the work platform at height. Considerations shall be given to assessing other options to accomplish this task. That being said, the industry has saying, look, we know that it's not intended for that, but there are many times that it is the most appropriate way for us to get our people to a point at a higher elevation. So the industry has acknowledged that there are ways that you can do it safely, and rather than having the prior language that you can't do it unless you have the specific written prior permission of the manufacturer with a detailed description of how that takes place, guidance will be provided in the standards on how to do this. Again, we're still in the position of saying that you should find alternative sources. If there's a stairway nearby, we don't want to just go and take a scissor lift there because it's convenient. Where permanent applications should be used, they should be used. But where it's appropriate, where it's safer in the safe use of these products, we're providing some guidance on opening the door, on being able to do that. In the training standard, it is the user's obligation to make sure that the training is provided in a manner that the trainee can understand. So in cases where we end up having non-English speaking operators, it's the user's obligation to provide a translator when requiring when required during training to ensure that non-English speaking workers understand the training requirements of the standard. Further, it's when that training is established, you got to keep in mind that it is still the user's obligation to ensure that the operator can read or understand the manual safety decals and instructions on all MUPs that he will use in the future. So we needed to open the door about language of training and how that's applied so that we can provide tools, so we can provide courses that are in other languages, but we need to still keep in mind that the operations manual and the decals on the machines that they may be using are not going to be in other than English or whatever language is on the product in the marketplace that the training will be delivered. You can see here that the operator training has to include everything that's in the safe use standard. The inclusion of all topics and issues in the safe use standard must be included in operator training. This should clearly reinforce that operator training is not familiarization and will bring about more standardization of what is provided in operator training courses as defined by these industry standards. The training standard has also introduced examiners in the needed expansion as we have we're bringing about the introduction of approved distance or online learning to be allowed. And if that's going to be delivered for the theory training, instructors will be doing the delivery of training, but where you have online types of deliverables, the introduction of examiners to test them was also required. So again, the standards now are addressing the online training that's being introduced into the marketplace as something that's acceptable in the confines for which is acceptable, and examiners to be attached to that so that they can do testing rather than having a trainer who be required to do the testing, and whereas trainers can deliver training. Another item that is being introduced is Occupant Knowledge. This new language introduces the requirement for all aerial work platform MUP occupants to be provided with some basic knowledge to safely work from an elevated work platform, and make it the responsibility of the MUP operator to ensure that the operators, the occupants of the machine that they're authorized to operate are prepared to work safely from the mobile elevated work platform. Simple items like you need to be wearing personal fall protection if you're on a boom type lift. When you're in the Canadian standards, and I'm not sure whether this will be introduced into the U.S. standards, anytime that you're on a mobile elevated work platform of any type and it's in motion, you require personal fall protection. So obviously when you're an occupant of that and you haven't gone through operator training, you may not know those things. So there's some basic knowledge that a occupant needs to know, and we're entering that into the standards to tie it into safe use. And I'm coming to the end, and that's that I need to restate where we are in the development. The CSA V354 aerial standards have been issued for public comment, which was closed one of the last days of July. So these standards are out there today. So the language that I'm referring to is language that you could have read yourself by looking at the CSA V354 draft standards open for public comment. As the manufacturers of MUPs, there's that term again, MUPs, Mobile Elevated Work Platforms, AWPs, clearly don't want to manufacture different machines in Canada than in the U.S. So that the release of these standards in close proximity is a very important consideration. So while the CSA standards are out there for public comment, the ANSI standards are still in draft development. So we need to be aware of the fact that, in process right now, the soonest that a CSA standard would most likely be issued is sometime at the end of Q1 in 2015. The next ANSI main committee meeting is the end of October. Again, I would be speculating thoroughly to give you any idea of when I would expect that standard to be out there, because it still hasn't been completed by the drafting work groups, approved by the main committee, and set for issue for public comments. So my expectation is that that's probably as much as a year off. But again, there's going to be pressure from the process of where the CSA standards are to make sure that these standards get out at the same time, because we sure don't want to have a different machine being required in Canada than is required in the U.S., because that would be a nightmare for all the manufacturers. So that kind of gives you, my thumbnail sketch on where we are, what the changes are, how they're being developed, who's developing them, and where things are at. So now I'm going to, again, turn it back over to Katie Parrish, who will communicate with me any questions that you may have had. Hopefully you followed the instructions and filled those questions out as we were going through this. And I look forward to your questions and hopefully be able to give you answers. And I'm finished. So thank you. Katie, back to you.
Katie's having some technical difficulties, so this is Mike, and I will be reading you the questions, Tony.
Lovely, Mike.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Okay. The first one is if a Type 3A MUP has a platform that extends, such as a scissor lift, is it a 3A or a 3B? Well,
assuming that the question refers to an extendable deck, the answer is it will still be a 3A, because the main platform will not extend beyond the center of the main platform or the center of gravity of the machine. So in the norm of what you're looking at, it's still going to be a 3A machine, because it will still follow that guidance of where the main platform is going to extend. And the calculations for that extension platform will be covered in the 3A design criteria.
Okay, thank you. Question 2, would the load sensing standards be retroactive or required just on MUPs manufactured after the standard takes effect?
Only on when the standard takes effect.
Okay. Does the use of a professional engineer only apply to machines without a manufacturer in business, or if a manufacturer does not respond to a request, can a PE be used? And I'm assuming that means the inspections didn't need to be overseen by a professional engineer.
I'm actually assuming that that question pertains to the availability of using a professional engineer on modifications and other elements. And under that definition, the assumption would be is that you would go to the manufacturer, and if you can't get an answer, you could go to an alternative source, the professional engineer. However, it would not be prudent not to go to the manufacturer first. And if the manufacturer says, no, you can't, and then you elect to get a different answer, I would say buyer beware.
Okay. When do you think load sensing will become mandatory on MUPs in the U.S.?
Well, it really will based on when the release of I'm going to go back and put it in right order. One is the assumption is that that language will be accepted into the new A92.20 design standards, and it's currently in the drafts. It's currently, as I said, accepted in the CSA B354 standards. So if it's going to go through there, I'm going to say there's a lot of pressure on the manufacturers to also want it to be in the ANSI standards. So first, the standards need to be approved, and then the date for implementation needs to take place. So based on my assumption that it's going to be at least, mid-2015 at the absolute earliest before that could take place, they could also put in, here you have X amount of time for this standard to go into effect. So it may be, 2016 at the earliest before you could see it, but it's obviously speculation on my part on when the standards will be completed, approved, and when the effective dates will be assigned to them.
Okay. The pre-start inspection to be performed, is it to be performed each day as the slide showed, or at the beginning of each shift?
Appropriately, it would be each day and the beginning of each shift.
Okay. One listener is asking, is there a plan to clone you? I know you're a proud father and grandfather, so I know you've been working on it, but I don't know if there's any other plan besides that.
Not to my knowledge.
Question 7. Who will certify the mechanic as qualified to perform the work, and who will be an authorized trainer? Must they attend the manufacturer's class?
Well, I mean, those are really great questions, and we had a lot of, I'm going to say, great discussion on that topic. The answer, as it will stand, it is the employer's responsibility to define who's qualified or not qualified, and that goes for the trainer and the technician who you are going to approve to be qualified to perform those tasks. So, I mean, it's very difficult to really say what is qualified. I think that the definition that we use in our industry is very subjective, not objective. And the byproduct of that is that even if you went to a manufacturer's mechanics training class, it's going to be focused in on even product class within that manufacturer. So, there's lots of elements that are in there that you need to be aware of. I think that, common sense needs to dictate, this at this point in time, which is, what do you think is qualified? So if you have a guy who's a mechanic at a automobile shop and you hire him tomorrow to work on your aerial work platforms because he's been a mechanic for the last 20 years, is he qualified to work on your aerial work platform? The answer is, maybe, but most cases probably maybe not, because it's different. If you take an aerial work platform mechanic and you have a plane, is he, although he's a mechanic, is he qualified to be a mechanic on a plane? And I start bringing those, examples in there to just try to frame at least the thinking on this, which is, we don't want to go out there and put people at risk by putting someone who is not competent to work on the equipment. And, when you're going over there and you're taking people, and having them work on the equipment, the fact that someone's worked on a forklift, can they work on an aerial lift and vice versa? So, I think that there are norms that, that we use. You have, apprentices and you have journeymen who have been out there working on it, and, whether you have to do it, in most cases, I would say the expression is that we kind of do on-the-job training, and we develop people over years rather than them sitting in a classroom and at the end of, a week they're qualified as a mechanic. So it's a little bit more complicated, and I'm not sure that I can adequately answer the question, because it really is an industry-wide question, and something that I'd love to get together with a group of people and be able to provide more guidance on, but we have not been able to wrestle the correct answer at this time.
Okay. Regarding record retention, the question is the standard going from 4 years to 10 for retention, does that apply only to maintenance or to maintenance and training records?
That particular requirement is coming from the safety standards on maintenance, so not specific to training.
Okay. Regarding the letter that will be required for someone to exit the platform on at height, why is that letter not included in the operator's manual? Why is it separate?
Well, my assumption when we're referring to a letter, the current standards, the language states that you can only exit with the prior written approval of the manufacturer. There are a few manufacturers, and I know that Genie and JLG do have some guidance on how and when that is acceptable. And again, it has probably a lot of limitations to it. So the question would be is where the limitations go beyond that, and you want to have an application where you're going to be using it. Can it be done? And there are cases where, that again, in the broad discussion of this topic, there probably are a lot of applications that are unique that, you're not going to just open the door and just say, here, you can use it, and, and it can be done every place and any place. So, we don't want to make aerial work platforms, which is it's a work platform, become an elevator. But there are cases where using that tool on certain applications, it's appropriate. So in the broad sense, the manufacturers aren't sitting around waiting to approve every application that you could possibly think of to present to them to. And there probably are, just hundreds and hundreds of different specific applications that you may be able to think about. So there is some guidance from the manufacturers. It's limited, and really what this is trying to do is expand that by saying, have a qualified person provide you the guidance to do this following these criteria, to give a little bit more flexibility so that we're not opening the door saying just use it any way you want to get onto something else, and providing some, I'm going to say, more guidance to it. And based on, what the standards say, be assured that the manufacturers in their operations manual will, by use of the standard in that guidance, include some of that information, much more than today.
Okay. Could you please tell us again when you kind of expect to see the ANSI changes going to review?
Review would be, I assume that means going out for public comment. Honestly, I would have been wrong 3 times prior to this because the opening discussion on this with ANSI 892 probably took place about 3 years ago when we started the discussion to get this done. CSA, approached this process a little differently and had the benefit of a lot of the work that ANSI has done up to this point in time. So CSA started this process a year ago and has it out for public comment. It's 3 years now with ANSI, and there's still, I'm going to say, a lot of work potentially that needs to be done. So I would speculate, if I were to say, if I were to put money on this, I'd say that it's at least over a year away.
Okay. Just a question.
Mike, just to take a back step to that, I think it's
okay.
prudent to make sure that everyone understands that all of these standards are being developed by volunteers, industry volunteers, who pay to go to meetings, who pay to spend their time to provide I'm going to say subject matter expertise in the development of these things. So I don't want to seem like I'm casting stones, even in my comment that it's taken a long time to get this stuff done. This is all done by volunteers who are paying to develop these things. So you got to keep in mind that all of these are volunteers who are developing these standards, and so think about all the work that you have on your plates and throwing this on top of it. It's a very important task, and it does take time and commitment to get them complete.
Okay. This touches on an earlier answer. It says someone is asking you to define a qualified person.
Well, hopefully, I mean, a qualified person. The terminology is the term itself is defined both by regulations and in the standards. You know, I mean, to read it out loud. Give me a second. A qualified person is one who, by possession of a recognized degree, certificate, or professional standing, or by extensive knowledge, training, and experience, has successfully demonstrated his or her ability to solve or resolve problems related to the subject matter, the work, and or the project. So when someone asks the question about who approves them, well, they successfully demonstrated it. So where is that demonstration being shown? That's the employer. So, you know, the fact that someone has a degree, you know, I mean, the same way I'd say, you know, if you had someone who just got a law degree and has never tried their first case, how comfortable are you on how well that person's qualified? They may be qualified in the fact that they have a degree and a certificate saying, I'm an attorney. But there are other aspects that come into it that, you know, are, you know, meaningful and subjective rather than objective. I can't go over and say, you know, you did this, you did this, you did this, and check, 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 now you're qualified. We do that, you know, and I would tell you that we probably have differences of opinion of who's qualified and who's not qualified at multiple times. But it really is not something that the industry is making hard and fast rules on. It does allow that flexibility, but the responsibility really does come to the employer who knows the employee, knows what his background, experience, knowledge is, and is approving them to go perform a task that they should be qualified to do.
All right. Can you take a few more questions?
Sure, I have nothing but time.
Okay. Is there any word on mandatory fall protection coming up, meaning a harness and a lanyard for scissor lifts or MUP Group 3A?
Well, in Canada, in the CSA standards, which, you know, again, ANSI will be looking at for harmonization as well, do require that personal fall protection be used on 3A type equipment, all types of equipment in actuality, when the machine is being moved, as opposed to all the time on a boom type lift where you have the ongoing risk of the catapult effect on a boom type equipment. So on scissor type lifts, as we would call them, the 3B type of category, the Canadian standards actually require it today, and the standard will impart that requirement in the new standards as well. And whether or not the ANSI A92 standards will adopt it or not, I can't predict at this moment.
Okay, so not everything that's in the other standards will necessarily come to the ANSI standards then?
Yes, that is, and vice versa. So prior to this standard, the Canadian standards were much more ISO-based in the assignment of responsibilities. So they went over and they said, this task has to be done, this task has to be done, this task has to be done. So whereas you have to do a pre-start inspection, you have to do a daily inspection, you have to do an annual inspection. But unlike ANSI, where they said that the owner has to do it, or the operator and the user has to do it, they didn't assign those responsibilities. But that has been integrated into the new proposed language for CSA. So that's an example of how you can have these variations. even while I talked about the things that we approved in the review of the ISO standards into the CSA standards, and we'll be doing it with the ANSI A92 standards, there are some things that in the ISO standards we didn't accept. One of the examples is that they have machine guarding on those vertical type lifts. So if you look at a scissor lift and you're in Europe and following the ISO standards, which was adopted into their standards, which is the EN 280 standards, you would go over and find that there's like a fence around the base of a scissor lift so that you can't get your hands in and have a crushing hazard. That aspect, while it is a safety feature, wasn't accepted in any of the meetings I was at for both ANSI or CSA, because we thought that there was many drawbacks on that. So if you drop something and it gets in there, how do you get it out safely? And whatever the discussions were that brought that to conclusion. So again, we're not whole cloth adopting anything. Otherwise, we just have one standard for the world or one standard for North America, and we do have different standards, and they're still driven by culture and some other priorities that market may have.
Okay. Are the proposed ANSI standards posted anywhere that non-committee members can see?
No. And the reason they're not is because they're a work in progress. It would be different what you saw last year, 3 years ago versus 2 years ago versus last year versus today. So because they're being drafted and they're being developed, the opportunity that a non-committee member would have, even if you're on the main committee, is when the drafting committee gets ready to release it. And then it goes to the main committee, which is anybody who's on the A92 committee, not just the design committee, the safe use committee, or the training committee. And then when that committee goes through and they give comments, it goes back to the drafting committee and they put those comments in place. It goes back and it's approved. And it's at that point in time that it's now out there where anybody in the world, public comment, is available. But it goes through a lot of scrutiny because we don't want to go over there and develop something that the world isn't going to accept. So, we beat it up thoroughly internally before we let someone else see it, is kind of the process. That being said, anybody, who wanted to be part of the committees could have come and participated in all the fun we have going to all these meetings. But at this point in time, as I said, the reason I'm more free in this discussion today is because the CSA standards released for public comment, all of these things. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be, as a committee member, free to talk about the details. But I would give you this guidance, which is we want to be as similar as possible. So the things that I'm talking about with CSA, believe me, are being discussed simultaneously with the ANSI standards. So if you had access to the drafts of the CSA standards and what I presented today, be assured that those things are relatively similar to the items being discussed and looked at by ANSI.
Okay. When the standards are available for public comment, where is notice of that presented? Where can people find out whether, because I know there's only a 60-day window to look at them, right?
I believe it's 60 days. I know that it was for CSA. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's 60 days for ANSI as well. The answer is that the Secretariat of the Standards for A92, it's the Scaffold and Access Industry Association, they put that out somewhere for public knowledge. In fact, Mike, I believe your magazine may be one of the publications, industry publications, that they make that notice of. But again, it really is the Secretariat of the Standards who releases that information out that you can see those at. One of the areas that I know you can always find them is on ANSI's site, which is here's the activity that's going on, and you can see those, but you have to be looking all the time. I mean, if you were looking at it for the last you'd be looking at it for the last 3 years and not see it come up yet. So you have to be looking at the right time within that 60-day period to know that it's being released. I I would suggest to you that, if you have an interest and you want to know about it, contact the Scaffold and Access Industry Association, and they can tell you how they're going to release it so that you can be assured that you would have that notification.
Okay. We have two more questions. Will the new CSA standards create the same standard across all Canadian provinces?
Well, the answer is the CSA standards are for all provinces. We end up having regulators from various provinces on the development committee. Will the different provinces adopt it is a separate question, and I think that that's probably where that question really comes from. And the answer is standards are voluntary consensus standards, and even the regulators who sit on it, who may agree with it, can only apply it if their regulatory, their regulations allow them to. Now, where they're silent on the issue, and an example of that would be mass climbers and transport platforms, they have that flexibility of being able to refer to those because they're industry-approved norms. But whether they do that or they don't do that is not, I'm going to say, required. And that's really why that's why in Canada they end up sitting on these committees so that their input and concerns can be addressed.
Okay, thank you. Question 15, and then the final one. The framework of training exists in the current A92 standard, but there seems to be a lack of standardized approach to training in the U.S. Will the new standalone training standard offer more clarity?
Well, the person who addressed it probably understands that when you're looking at the 11 bullet points that are in the requirements today, if they were making that an assessment, is that clear enough? The answer is probably yes. So, without it being so prescriptive that it says, here you have to do this and do this and do this, and this has to take you, 4 hours, and this, unless we get to that level, and we won't, you're going to still find variations to it. That said, hopefully I tried to articulate that we now have a safe use standard, which is a whole standard, and training needs to adopt all of the elements in the safe use standard. So my hope, if nothing else, is that by having a safe use standard in a training standard and more, and the training standard even as a standalone standard as opposed to a piece within a standard, having safe use and training, I believe will do several things. One is once they come out, we're all going to be talking about them, and we're going to be, raising awareness about them. And I think it will put pressure overall within the industry for us to be doing it in a more standardized way, so that you're not going to have what I will call non-compliant training going on. Someone who is, saying I'm giving you operator training, when I drop it off in 25 minutes. Well, for me, that's familiarization on steroids, not operator training. And I believe that the standards will make those things more clear. It'll have more detail to it to make what should be in there more clear. And my hope and desire, and again, the purpose of developing these standards is to make it more standardized, so that what one person is doing, the other person should be doing as well.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. A rebroadcast is available at www.saf-tconference.com. And special thanks to the sponsor for today's webinar, IPAF.
Thank you all. And again, my contact information was on there, tony.groat@awpt.org. So if there are future questions, I'd be more than happy to communicate with you and give you what information I can.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks all for your attendance and attention during this presentation.